Tonight, convicted serial killer Robert Pickton will soon become eligible for day parole.
A lot of people hear 7 people a day is such a, we hear it all the time now, 7 people. Like, those are real people. Like, they're, you know, someone's grandparent or kid or anything in between.
Part 2 of our series looking into the escalating opioid crisis in Vancouver.
For me, it's about culture, it's about color, a lot of it's about family as well. Those 3 elements are the ones that define the artwork that I create.
And a First Nation artist's new exhibit blends culture, color, and family ties. Good evening, I'm Savannah Kelly. Welcome to APTN National News. February 22nd, 2024 is going to be a date that families of the victims of convicted serial killer Robert Pickton will not soon forget. Pickton is eligible for day parole, and APTN's Tina House caught up with the Assembly of First Nations BC Regional Chief Terry Teegee to get his opinion on that hearing.
With the upcoming parole hearing for Robert Pickton, convicted serial killer, there's a lot at stake, especially here in British Columbia. Joining me today is AFN Regional Chief Terry Teegee. Terry, your file is Justice and Police. Now, what would you like to say about that upcoming parole hearing for that prolific serial killer?
Well, I think it's very concerning for many of the families, especially those that he was never convicted of. He was convicted on 6. Certainly, I think there's no closure for the rest of the families who had loved ones that were murdered by Robert Pickton, and I think this parole is something that needs to change. I mean, a person like that shouldn't be up for parole, because it's really, I think, one of the things that we do know and what we heard from the families, it's re-traumatizing some of the families.
And let's go back to that. Yes, he was only convicted of 6 out of 26. There's still 20 other families that are still waiting for justice for those killings, and many others that have a lot of questions regarding Pickton and others that were implicated in that terrible, terrible tragedy. What would you like to say about those 20 families right now that are waiting to hear what can happen next for their justice?
Well, I think those families want to seek some sort of justice, some answers. It's certainly, our prayers are with them during this very difficult time. I think, what needs to happen is to realize that the justice system really doesn't fit in many of these cases in regards to how does this affect the after effects of Robert Pickton. Really, I think many of these families do have unanswered questions, and in particular, like with some of the issues with the evidence, how were they involved? Was every measure taken to make sure that the evidence that is still in the police's hands was utilized and or, I would say, repatriated with those families?
As the AFN Regional Chief here for BC, what do you plan on doing to make it better for so many women and girls that are still vulnerable to predators like Pickton and others?
Well, I think, there's many recommendations that we heard in the national inquiry. 231 calls to justice. We need to implement those calls. And certainly it's fallen on deaf ears on the federal government. It's incumbent upon this government to really implement many of the recommendations with the First Nations, not simply checking off the boxes and saying it's done. I think this is a process of changing the relationship with Indigenous peoples, for this case in particular, for Indigenous women and girls, that they are safe. And that was the impetus of why the inquiry was started. We're still seeing many missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls in this country, and that has to change, that has to stop.
And finally, do you have a direct message for Prime Minister Justin Trudeau about this issue?
Implement the 231 calls to justice. He has to not only release a report on this, but also commit the resources necessary for the 231 calls to justice. That's what our women were saying. That's what our people are saying. There needs to be a plan to implement the 231 calls.
Absolutely. Regional Chief Teegee, always good to see you, my friend. Thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you for your work on this issue.
Thank you.
Back to you in studio.
A Mi'kmaq First Nation in New Brunswick recently raised a Palestinian flag. As Angel Moore explains, it was to call for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza and remember the children who have died in the current Israel-Hamas conflict.
That's a Palestinian flag. It's being raised for the children of Gaza in a ceremony at the Nadahuaneg First Nations School. Asia Johnson helped raise the flag.
I like raising the flag because when people are getting hurt in Gaza, that means that it's important to raise their flag.
Zaid Kaji is a Miramichi physician who organized the event. Although the Palestinian flag is not affiliated with Hamas, declared a terrorist group by Canada, Israel has banned it from public places in Palestine. But Kaji insists his intentions are peaceful, and it's to remember the thousands of children killed in the conflict.
My love for our children, my love for my children, and if I love my children, I can only assume other parents love their children.
About 200 people gathered at the community school gym where Kaji announced,
"This is the first community in this country where the Palestinian flag will be raised on a permanent basis in solidarity."
Kaji approached Chief George Guinish to display the Palestinian flag because Guinish had seconded a motion by Wilton Littlechild at last December's Assembly of First Nations meeting. The motion called for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza and recognized Palestinians as Indigenous people under international law.
And that's when it struck us with the AFN resolution that we were knocking on the wrong doors, and that there's a powerful force in Canada who will allow us the avenue to express our humanity.
Guinish believes what is happening in Gaza is similar to what has happened to Indigenous people in Canada.
I guess caring about, the larger Indigenous community. How can we support each other? How can we, show that we do care about what is going on?
Kia Atencio is an activist from the Listugush Mi'kmaq Nation. She traveled from Halifax, Nova Scotia to show support for the event.
It was a proud moment as a Mi'kmaq person to see that another Mi'kmaq person recognize and push forward this resolution so that we can demand a ceasefire and have peace.
The event brought Mi'kmaq community members and Palestinian people together, including Layla Abamer and Mariam Mohammed, who both traveled from Fredericton.
This is huge. At a time where we can't raise our flag in our own cities, to see it being raised here was very emotional, very healing, and with seeing everything that has been going on for the past 4 months, I think we get numb at some point. This kind of touched a very, very deep wound. Yeah.
Mohammed felt united with the Mi'kmaq community.
And I've always felt a sense of connection being a Palestinian with the Indigenous story and what they've gone through. And so to see us all here together, here today together, it just was healing.
The Gitbuesk Women Eagle Spirit Drummers Group sang in ceremony.
But it was very powerful, and to see this other community come into our community, and they're just like us. Like the kids are the same, the parents are the same, it was amazing.
Guinish said the Palestinian flag will fly until Orange Shirt Day on September 30th. Angel Moore, APTN National News, Nadahuaneg First Nation.
A traveling reconciliation project landed in the nation's capital this week. It's called the Ballantine Project, named after the young man who is intent on creating reconciliation through dialogue. 29-year-old Dwight Ballantine has been presenting talks like this for the past 4 years. On Tuesday, it was before a classroom at the Notre Dame High School in Ottawa. He's open about his 21 years of life in the remote community of Montreal Lake Cree Nation in Saskatchewan. From dropping out of school to dealing with drugs, alcohol, and racism, and how he moved away, went back to school, and turned his life around. He says the project is an opportunity to empower Indigenous youth and educate others about the issues on some First Nations.
When I moved from reserve, I thought people knew about life on reserve, and I realized that nobody really knows what life on reserve is like. You hear stories about on reserve, but to actually share the story of what I went through for 21 years of my life, it opens a lot of conversations, and I feel like having that conversation is the first step to educating yourself as a Canadian. And I like speaking to diverse groups because it's what opens the door to deeper conversations.
We want to hear what you think about the Ballantine Project or any other story you see here tonight. Here's how to continue the conversation. If you have a story you want to share, send us an email to news@aptn.ca. To read and watch our stories, go to aptnnews.ca. You can find us online on your favorite social media sites, including TikTok, YouTube, LinkedIn, and X. Follow APTN News to join the conversation and see our latest stories. We need to step aside for a short break, but when we come back, we take a closer look at what's being done to try and address the opioid crisis in Vancouver.
So I think we are kind of so far into this crisis that it's like almost 8 years that people are sort of just used to it, and we shouldn't be used to it. This is a large amount of people in our province that have died, and it's a bigger issue than people are willing to admit.
Welcome back to APTN National News. The Yukon government gave an update Wednesday on the work it's doing to improve safety in downtown Whitehorse. The government has faced criticism from downtown business owners and residents who say shelter users are causing disturbances and safety issues. The territory's Minister of Health and Social Services says ongoing work is being done to decentralize food services away from the White House emergency shelter. Other measures include extending the contract for a private security firm to patrol the downtown core, the recent launch of Indigenous outreach service Moccasin Mobile, and the opening of a managed alcohol program this spring. The work is part of the government's Downtown Whitehorse Safety Response Action Plan released late last year.
We will continue to listen. We will make sure that we are listening to members of our community, business, citizens, people with learned experience, individuals who are street involved, and doing absolutely everything we can to respond to that in a real way.
A 3-day conference held by the National Assembly of Remote Communities began today in Edmonton. The group wants to have a united voice for northern communities to have access to the same resources as the rest of the country. APTN's Chris Stewart was there.
Hundreds of people from across Canada's remote areas were here at the Expo Centre in Edmonton. Grand Chiefs, chiefs, elders, and youth. This is the second national gathering for the National Assembly of Remote Communities, or NARC. The group was formed in 2021 to have a united voice for the remote areas across the country, to help them access the same services that southern communities already enjoy. Bobby Narcisse is the Deputy Grand Chief of the Anishinaabe Aski Nation in Ontario, and the co-chair of NARC.
Many of our remote communities are given the short end of the stick in terms of resourcing. Many of our citizens have to leave First Nation communities to go to urban centers to access things like mental health, education, employment opportunities, all those different areas that are so readily available to many of our urban brothers and sisters.
NARC was created with child welfare in mind, to help with an equitable distribution of the recent $20 billion settlement for the long-term reform of First Nations child and family services, and a long-term approach for Jordan's principle. David Pratt is the first Vice Chief of the Federation of Sovereign Indigenous Nations and co-chair of NARC.
We're going to get a lot of input from the grassroots and our elders and our youth in terms specific to the long-term reform of child welfare. So all of that's going to be going into addressing the remoteness quotient and the remoteness factor. So very important over the conversations we'll be having over the course of the next 3 days.
The conference runs until Friday. Chris Stewart, APTN National News, Edmonton.
In part 2 of our coverage on the opioid crisis in Canada, APTN's Tina House takes a closer look at what's being done to try and help the situation as more and more people are losing their lives from toxic drugs.
Safe supply! One more time, safe supply!
As the death toll rises across Canada, here in British Columbia, toxic drugs are now the leading cause of death for people under 59 years of age, accounting for more deaths than suicides, homicides, accidents, and natural diseases combined. Here at the Vancouver Area Network of Drug Users, known as VANDU, these pictures represent some of those that have lost their lives to toxic drugs. It also shows that accidental overdoses can literally happen to anyone from any walk of life, and BC is now seeing 7 deadly overdoses a day.
In this picture, everybody has passed away related to an overdose. It's quite sad and shocking, but it's more common than you think to look at a picture and see a whole group of people no longer here.
Brittany Graham is the executive director of VANDU. She says she knows close to 60 people personally that have died from toxic drugs.
Problem is that when people hear 7 people a day is we hear it all the time now, 7 people. Like, those are real people. Like, they're, someone's grandparent or kid or anything in between. And so I think we are kind of so far into this crisis that it's like almost 8 years that people are sort of just used to it, and we shouldn't be used to it. This is a large amount of people in our province that have died, and it's a bigger issue than people are willing to admit.
It's been just over a year since BC launched a program to allow 2.5 grams of street drugs per person for personal use. The program is supposed to save lives, but has it helped at all? BC Provincial Health Officer Bonnie Henry wants to prescribe other out-of-the-box safer supply solutions.
It's providing regulated or pharmaceutical alternative medications, but not necessarily through an individual prescription. I think there are models out there that we need to look at. I think we need to keep this conversation going. My office is doing a special PHO report, and we're in the process of looking at what's out there in other jurisdictions around the world. We're not yet at a place where I can say this is one model. But it's not an either or. We've heard from many people that we need to have many different options for different groups of people.
Clinical studies have shown that Indigenous people are dying at a higher rate, and government officials are hoping that the prescribed safer supply program will be one of the many tools to prevent more deaths.
Prescribed safer supply policy should really aim to reduce inequities and decrease stigma and be provided in a culturally safe, trauma-informed way. We need to work with people who are disproportionately impacted, including Indigenous communities and populations, youth, others, to ensure we're meeting their needs and meeting them where they're at.
However, despite these measures to try and help, Brittany Graham points to a major hole in the safe measures currently in place.
Here in Vancouver, a lot of people who are Indigenous actually smoke their drugs as opposed to inject their drugs. Most overdose prevention services do not cater to smoking because of work-based BC legislation, whether it's like the municipal legislation, those exemption requests. So all of those things lead to us not being able to open safe inhalation spaces as easily as like overdose prevention services for injection.
Tina House, APTN National News, Vancouver.
We need to take one more short break. Our photo of the day and weather are next. Plus, a heritage park near Saskatoon is empowering Indigenous artists to showcase their culture.
For me, it's about culture, it's about color, a lot of it's about family as well. Those three elements are the ones that define the artwork that I create.
Welcome back. Time now for our photo of the day. Holly Carpenter sent us this view of downtown Edmonton, Alberta. Holly mentions how the skyline contrasted with what looks like a modern world of blocks. Kind of reminds me of Minecraft. Thanks for sharing that photo, Holly. Send your pictures now to share@aptn.ca for the chance to be our next photo of the day. Now let's take a look at tomorrow's weather forecast. Starting off on the east coast, 2 degrees in Fredericton, snowy and -2 in St. John's. Inukjuak, sunshine and -29, Kuujjuaq -25 there. Val-d'Or, snowy and +6, St. Jovite +4. Toronto, +10 there, North Bay, mix of sun and cloud, 2 degrees. Kapuskasing, snowy and +1, Big Trout Lake, flurries and -14. Sunshine and -24 for Churchill, -19 in Thompson. +1 in Winnipeg, Princess Harbour, snowy and -12. Yorkton, snowy and -1, Saskatoon, 0 degrees. Stony Rapids, snowy there and -16, Buffalo Narrows, -4. Sunny and +4 in Peace River, +5 in Grand Prairie. +2 in sunny in Red Deer, Medicine Hat, +4. Campbell River, rainy and 9 degrees there, Bella Coola, sunshine and 9 degrees. Fort Nelson, sunny and +2, Prince George, rainy, +1 there. Watson Lake, -1, Rock River, flurries and -3. Wati, flurries, -12 there, Fort Simpson, -9 and sunny. Paulatuck, snowy and -12, Tuktoyaktuk, -17. Baker Lake, sunshine and -27 there, Whale Cove, -24. Iqaluit, -25 there, and Kingate, -23 and snowy. Wanuskewin Heritage Park is empowering Indigenous artists to showcase their culture. After a month-long residency there, a Saskatchewan artist has a new exhibit that's now open to the public. Our reporter Rachel May has more on how one artist is expressing his culture.
I'm a big believer that we all have our part to play. We owe it to future generations to show that and to be a part of that story.
Color and Culture is the name of Kevin Piace's new exhibit, now open at Wanuskewin Heritage Park. Piace is a member of Yellow Quill First Nation and Peter Chapman First Nation. He attended both Gordon's and St. Michael's Indian residential schools during his childhood. When it comes to creating art, Piace said that it's been therapeutic to share Indigenous culture.
For me, it's about culture, it's about color, a lot of it's about family as well. Those three elements are the ones that define the artwork that I create.
Piace's art is filled with color that depicts traditional floral patterns, inspired by beadwork to honor his late Cookham. For the past 15 years, he also spent his time teaching students about art and the part culture plays in it.
Anything that I've learned from that experience is that when we're talking about reconciliation, everybody has a part to play in that. I'm no different.
Piace says that he uses his art to help people work together on projects that walk the path towards reconciliation. Color and Culture is now open until May 1st at Wanuskewin Heritage Park in the Olivia Gallery. Rachel May, APTN National News, Saskatoon.
And that's all the time we have for your midweek news. For news anytime, visit our website at aptnnews.ca. I'm Savannah Kelly. Marcy Miigwech, thank you for joining us. Take care and have a great night.